Come now to the adjournment. The whip to move.
I beg to move this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Dr. Phillip Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Apologies for being premature. Well, this is a rather esoteric subject on the face of it, and I'd like to explain why I've chosen it. I'm Vice Chairman of the Parliamentary Space Committee, and as a consequence of that role, I've come into contact with many people in the space industry who have spoken to me about microgravity and the research thereof and the potential value to the British economy. I don't have any direct constituency link. I have a company that does provide equipment for satellites. The UK space industry has been growing year on year in excess of 10% in the last decade. I genuinely think it should be part of the government's growth strategy, and I also think it would contribute to the diversification of the economic base of this country. I've had a particular pleasure of meeting Tim Peake, who is the only British astronaut on the European Space Agency manned programme, and he also happens to be a champion of microgravity. And I think that's quite important because it indicates to you how good we are in Britain at research in this area. So why microgravity research? Well, as I've just said, the UK is very strong in this area. Microgravity crosses a large number of fields, and actually that may contribute to why it has not always received the support from research councils in the past. For the second reason, I think it does have huge potential economic benefits, particularly in the area of biomedicine. And thirdly, well, I personally, and I don't think I'm alone in this House, think that we should have a manned spaceflight programme. And I think we need to do this with partners. Maybe it's with Europe, maybe it's with Russia, maybe it's with the US. But I genuinely believe that we are better off seeking out new knowledge, endeavour, inspiration. All of these things are positives, and I think Britain was at its best when it was displaying those facets. The structure of my speech will be that first of all, I'll explain microgravity. I'm sure all colleagues here understand it fully and don't need that definition, but for the benefit of the many people who've tuned in for this debate on BBC Parliament, I will put forward a definition of microgravity. I will then touch upon the sectors that microgravity research can impact upon. Then we'll talk about the history of governments, both this one and previous, in terms of their involvement in microgravity research, or the lack thereof. And then I may put some questions to the Minister about the subject. As a starter, as life evolved on this Earth, lots of physical and chemical change took place, in the environment, which caused adaptations to take place in life, be it plant or animal. The only thing that's been constant in 4.8 billion years is gravity. And it's been constant all that time, and as a consequence, there's predicted to be little or no memory, genetic memory, within organisms now of how they would respond to low gravity. And as a consequence, it is thought that the low gravity environment may sort of uncover some novel sort of mechanisms, some sort of responses to adaptations that then may benefit the economy in terms of sort of commercial application. And that's basically why researchers are so eager to get into space, so to speak, and to test the impact of microgravity. Now, onto the definition. This is just one of many I've read. Microgravity research is the research into the impact of low or zero gravity on human health and on other materials, and the exploitation of a low gravity environment to conduct research into pure science and human applications. We can create this low gravity here on Earth. We can do it in these drop towers, sort of like you get at Alton Towers. Parabolic flights as well can also create this. But to be honest, the best place for this to happen is in space. You can do this by something called sounding rocket, and at the moment it is done with the International Space Station. Now, why conduct the research? Well, quite simply, gravity adds complexity. That's essentially what happens to certain sort of experiments that you might want to look in. And by that I mean it can contribute to convection currents, shear stresses, buoyancy, and this can impact upon processes that we would like to study. So in order to try and remove those potential confounding variables from the experiment, you need to go into a microgravity environment, and the best place for that is in space. Now, in terms of the sectors that may be impacted upon, in both economically and I think also in terms of human knowledge and pushing back those boundaries, first let me mention biomedical. I mean, as a doctor, you would expect me to do so. The biomedical applications of this are numerous. I mean, essentially, it is thought that putting cells into a microgravity environment affects the way in which they work, all cells. So consequently, if you can understand how cells work, how they communicate with each other, it can have broad applications to the study of cancer, coronary heart disease, AIDS, diabetes. So we can all understand that by doing that, we then may get to developing new therapies, new drugs, which then will benefit mankind. And in economic terms, if there are British patents attached to these developments, we benefit here. UK PLC benefits. You can also grow pure protein crystals, and by doing so, aid the understanding of the immune system, yet again benefiting healthcare. One that's most noted is in musculoskeletal systems, the response of bone and muscle. Now, I'm sure most people here recognise that spacemen who spend lots of time in space have been found to have reduced bone density, to have muscle wastage. It's not fully understood as to why that happens. By trying to understand that, trying to understand how tissues remodel, we may very well be able to find some new techniques to treat musculoskeletal disorders. Other sectors, fluid physics. I mean, the understanding of forces that affect fluids has wide applications. I mean, if we can understand it better, it can contribute towards the miniaturization of electronic devices, the Blackberries that we use, the laptops that we use. All of these things have benefited from greater knowledge in this area. And by using these developments will undeniably lead to reduction in costs to the customer when they're buying those electronic devices at John Lewis and elsewhere. Of course I will give way.
The Honourable Member, forgive me, I'm not an expert in microgravity research either, far from it, let me tell you, but I did do a wee look at it beforehand. I understand that some of the efforts that we put into microgravity research is in relation to earthquakes and pre-warning of earthquakes. Perhaps a member would like to maybe comment upon that, because obviously if you can pre-warn them in a world of earthquakes and tremors, then you might be able to save life as well.
I thank the Honourable Member. I have absolutely no idea about them predicting earthquakes, and I'm struggling to think why an understanding of microgravity would help determine an earthquake. But you've given me something to go and look up when I leave this chamber. And finally, if you allow me, I'll move on to material science. I mean, essentially the materials, composite materials, how they will behave in a microgravity environment, how you can develop new alloys, new ceramics. This has broad applications. I mean, we're at sort of cutting edge when it comes to Formula One and the use of composite materials and alloys. This comes from space. This has come originally from the space sector. So by doing this, we will enhance our standing in that area. This is not an exhaustive list. There's a variety of different sectors. I've seen one suggestion of plant biology and growing plant stem cells on an industrial scale in space, thereby helping our need to develop biomass for energy. I mean, I could go on. Now, moving on to the history of government involvement, I've had a look at this. I think the Pippard report in 1989 is the first mention I could find of this, and it's quite an interesting report and made some interesting observations which have since proven to be true. The Wakeham Review of 2003 found that a lack of interest, essentially, from research councils, which is what I alluded to at the start. I think there is a sense that microgravity doesn't have a single voice, and therefore it hasn't got the funding in the past. As a result of the Wakeham Review, Britain didn't contribute to the ELLIPS programme with the European Space Agency. Now, ELLIPS stands for European Life and Physical Sciences Programme, and it was started in 2001, and it is ongoing. And the ELLIPS 4 sort of funding round is due at the next ministerial ESA in 2012. And I personally would be pushing for us to participate in that, not least of which because by doing so it would allow us to work with NASA, because NASA will not allow us to work outside of ESA in terms of the relationship as I understand it. Now finally, the questions to the Minister. First of all, one question. Can the Minister confirm that the government is not against manned spaceflight? For some time in this country, it was actually government policy to be against manned spaceflight. I think manned spaceflight is inspirational. Anybody who goes into a school to do it on a STEM day, a science, technology and engineering mathematics day, will find children building rockets and looking at pictures of planets. The reality is that space inspires children. We need more scientists and engineers in the future. I spoke about it in my maiden speech. I don't know how many of you were there for that, but I spoke about the inspirational quality of space, and I strongly believe that it has to be a man on top of that rocket for it to be inspiring. So I'd be interested to know if the Minister can confirm that. The second question is, can the Minister outline the Government's position on the ELIPS programme, if possible, and indeed broadly on the ESA manned spaceflight programme, in anticipation of the 2012 ministerial? I say that because for about £200 million a year, we can participate in that programme, and over a 20 to 25 year period participate in perhaps the exploration of the Moon and further on to Mars. It may seem an extravagance to some. This is not an extravagance. For every $14 spent on the Apollo space program, the US economy was estimated to get $14 in return. You can make money out of space. It's as simple as that. And I think that Britain, we're outstanding at it, and we do it on a shoestring, to be honest, in comparison to some of our competitors. And I think in the future, I think we should be a greater player in space. And I know that the Minister shares my feelings on that. I mean, I think we have projections to try and increase our space industry. I forget the figures over the next 10 years, and I'm wholly supportive of that. I also would like to know the Minister's opinion on a sort of a microgravity forum. It's fair to say that having met people, I've had emails actually from around the world, actually, ever since I tweeted that I was going to be doing this. And it's been interesting. There's not one voice, it seems. And so I think microgravity is an area perhaps needs one voice, and I wonder if the Minister has any views on that. And finally, this is a more general point. Whitehall seems risk-averse to me. As a new boy in town, I get the distinct impression that Whitehall is risk-averse. If there's one thing you cannot be when it comes to space, is risk-averse. You have to go for it. Now, I'm encouraged that there have been some changes to legislation with regards to aiding the space industry with regards to insurance over going into space, which the government has announced since last year. But ultimately, I think Whitehall still remains risk-averse, and I would be interested to know what the Minister's view on that is. In conclusion, I think the best way of concluding actually is by, I had an email from somebody, and in it, he ended one of his paragraphs as follows. His view was that in addition to providing benefits to society, microgravity research would also help the UK to maintain some degree of scientific relevance. Scientific capability in a nation is a recognised necessity for economic development. I couldn't have put it better myself, which is why I called for this debate. Thank you.
Mr. David Morris.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Bracknell, in securing this important debate? It is particularly timely given that we are gearing up for the European Space Agency conference in 2012, an event which sees funding priorities in this industry that will be set for the future, and as a result, the UK's involvement in the S8 will also be forged. Before I start, can I thank Tom Gunner and Sarah Chilman from the Parliamentary Space Committee for the work they do all year round in promoting space. Unlike many other industries, space does not have lots of lobbyists with huge budgets, but the small team at the PSC is nonetheless effective. Also, I must thank Astrid for allowing Tom and Sarah to undertake this important work. What has got to be said is that the space industry has increasingly grown 10% year on year, which is really one of the major success stories of this country, but it's not been sung out very loudly. For most people, the space industry seems both literally and figuratively distant, but we need the public to understand just how big an impact this high-tech industry has on ours and everybody else's lives. Like my honourable friend, I'm Vice Chairman of the Parliamentary Space Committee, and many of my constituents ask why an MP from a Northern Lancashire constituency would take an interest in this field. I point out that there are two important benefits to the space industry. The first, high-tech jobs in places like Bracknell and the M4 corridor, but perhaps even more important is the way that the space technologies impact on areas like Morecambe and Lunesdale and everybody else's life on a day-to-day basis. You see, due to the space industry, we have people getting around easily by sat-nav, exploring areas of the country that they would not ordinarily be able to go to and find a way around, rolling out fast satellite broadband to rural areas, and satellite television, bringing wider entertainment choice to everyone. You know, these are industries as a direct spin-off to the space industry itself that, even though hasn't got major funding, is a success story year in, year out. Space delivers a whole host of everyday, some might even say mundane benefits, but we are not always very good at pointing out the successes. And I think we can all agree that whilst we have led the way on space in general, we have lagged behind badly at microgravity research in particular. I would like to add my name to those who believe that we should be involved in ELIPS and, by extension, the International Space Station. It cannot be right that Germany funds 50% of it, and I think the widely accepted tradition of the UK being negative about putting scientists into space should really end. Not at least because space tourism and exploration are obviously going to become boom industries in the future, in the same way that transatlantic shipping and air travel became hugely popular in a very short space of time. We do not want to be on the list of countries that have been left behind by this exciting new development in human history. I asked a number of questions to the Secretary of State about preparedness for the next European Space Agency Ministerial Council, and I'm glad that things are progressing very well. But I think we need the government to set greater involvement for the UK in microgravity research as a central aim for that conference. And also, I think it's very important to ride on the back of this particular industry, the fact that future generations are now looking towards science as a cool subject to be involved in. Being on the Science and Technology Committee, it's shown through one of our reports that young people are engaging particularly well with anything to do with space exploration. Amazingly enough, when I was a small boy, I made an Apollo rocket like many of the members in this room, an Airfix kit. I'm sure we can all remember sitting at the kitchen table, gluing our hands to our faces and everywhere but the model itself. And funnily enough, my little boy Robert, he found my Saturn V rocket that I made. I forgot I actually still had it. And I begrudgingly had to put this thing together, and it brought back very, very happy memories. But I looked at my son, who's 8 years old, and he turned around and said, "Dad, why are we not going to the moon again?" And I think that's very poignant. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Rise of the debate, I call the Minister, Mr. David Willits.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And it has been I think if I may say so, a rather special adjournment debate this evening, in which we have seen the passions of colleagues and members of this House for space travel and the space sector exposed to wider debate. And I would like to congratulate the member for Bracknell for bringing this debate and leading it so well. I'd like to thank the member for Morecambe as well for his intervention, because he also spoke with the authority that comes from being a member of the Parliamentary Space Committee. And if I may say so, it's also great to see in his seat the member for Windsor and Maidenhead, who does an excellent job as the chair of the Parliamentary Space Committee. So we have people here who rightly care about space, and I'd like to make it clear that we in the government realise the significance of space, and it's why we have tried to support the space industry, even through the very tough fiscal decisions we've had to take. And through my role of co-chairing the Space Leadership Council, I have a good and constructive dialogue with the industry. And of course, we were able to get a sector of the growth review devoted specifically to the space industry. It matters in lots of different ways. It matters as crucial to scientific and technological advance. We do undoubtedly conduct high-grade scientific research through the space program, and the technological challenges posed by the space program drive technology forward. The space sector is a rapidly growing part of the British economy, as we've heard, growing at 10% a year. There are not many parts of the British economy growing as fast as China is, but the space sector is. And I also absolutely agree with the final point that we've just heard from my honourable friend, the member for Morecambe and Lonsdale, and that is the point that the space, the excitement of space, can get younger people involved in science. I do believe, as someone who wants to see more and more young people excited by space, I do believe that by and large it is indeed space and dinosaurs that interest young people in science. And in America, they still talk of the generation of scientists and technicians that came through as a result of the Apollo effect, getting them interested and involved. So space has a lot to contribute. And within the inevitable constraints of public spending, we absolutely do our best to back it. Now, I was asked some rather specific questions, and let me try very briefly to answer them. First of all, the whole issue of manned space flight. I should make it clear that we in the UK have historically focused our space investments in areas such as telecommunications, earth science, and robotic exploration of the universe. And as we are not directly involved in the International Space Station, we have not developed human spaceflight technology. Though we have, of course, relevant technology for future exploration of the Moon and Mars, including advanced robotics, the ExoMars rover program being a classic example of that, communication systems and small satellites. So we have historically taken that view. But when I was asked the question, do we have a kind of objection of principle to manned spaceflight? We have no objection of principle. There are always going to be, however, very pertinent questions about cost effectiveness. And I'm, of course, very happy. The government is delighted that Major Tim Peake has been selected on merit to join the ESA astronaut corps. It's a great opportunity for Major Tim Peake to inspire young people in the UK, and I know he's already doing that. So that's our attitude to manned spaceflight. I was then asked particularly about the whole issue of microgravity. And I think it's correct to try to disentangle microgravity research from the manned spaceflight issue. It's possible to research microgravity without getting involved in manned spaceflight. And we do understand the value of microgravity research, but there are some difficult obstacles to overcome in microgravity research. First, the range of topics is so wide that there is no coherent voice to articulate the needs of researchers. And this is absolutely the point that my honourable friend, the member for Bracknell, made, and I do understand it. Materials researchers don't normally work with biomedics or astrobiologists, but all of them would find microgravity a very important way of pursuing their research. So we do have a kind of fragmented and diverse group that could benefit from microgravity research, and he makes very eloquently the argument that it would be helpful if they could come together with a more coherent voice. And of course, historically, the UK has had little involvement in microgravity research, so researchers are largely unaware of the possibilities. And let me make it clear, I would welcome new collaborations, the ones that are developing, and ways which do serve the interests of UK researchers and those of our international partners. Yes, of course.
I was very interested in the point he was making about the government's support for a forum. Would he support ministerial attendance if a forum was indeed established?
As I hope the space sector knows, I personally am very committed to work closely with the sector, and I think that the idea of a microgravity forum would be very worthwhile, and I think it would be great if people who could benefit from microgravity research came together. If it would make sense, I'd be willing to meet such a group, but again, I do have to stress that I am working within the fixed science budget. It's got the protection of the ring fence of the £4.6 billion. We're all very proud of that as evidence of the commitment to science, but I have to work within that budget. So provided that the ministerial attendance doesn't bring the assumption the minister is armed with a checkbook when he comes to the meeting, then on that basis I'm happy to attend. And we will then, of course, pursue it from there. Yes, of course.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. It seems to me that the Research Council model for funding research has worked incredibly well over the years, over the decades, and that was established in the 80s by Lady Thatcher when she was Prime Minister. And I just wonder whether actually the Minister may wish to perhaps write a letter urging the research councils to consider such a forum or a meeting, which may help to kind of facilitate some interest in that direction?
Well, I think that it would be best if there were ways in which this research community came together. I'm always very wary of anything that could be taken as a breach of the Haldane principle, which hovers over all these debates. I have to be very clear of trying to give instructions or directions on areas of research activity. One of the reasons why we have an excellent science base in this country is that by and large ministers have kept their grubby hands off these kind of specific issues. But as I said, I've tried to indicate that I recognise that microgravity research could play an important role, that it has suffered from this structural problem of having such a diverse, different range of disciplines that could benefit from it. I can see the argument of them coming together in a more coherent way. I'd be happy to look at that. But many of the decisions would be ultimately, of course, for the research councils. I should just very briefly say in the few minutes remaining that, of course, a lot of this stuff will come up as we plan for the European Space Agency ministerial in 2012. And no doubt we will be invited by ESA if we asked if we want to join its microgravity research programme, ELLIPS. And I am told that the UK Space Agency has already held a workshop with researchers and providers of facilities to explore their mutual interests, and it'll be holding a further workshop in November to examine the opportunities presented through ESA's programmes. So we are, as we prepare for the next ESA ministerial, of course we're considering this as alongside many other options. Let me conclude, Mr. Speaker, by also saying that we do recognise the significance not just of microgravity, but of the presence of people aiming to become astronauts like Major Tim Peake. And I am delighted that Tim Peake has said that he will act as an ambassador for microgravity research in the UK because of our ambition that he should be able to engage in space flight. It's great that he's willing to take that role. And I'm confident that as part of that role and the work that the UK Space Agency will be doing, we will be considering the proposed strategy for space biomedicine that the UK Space Biomedical Consortium is developing with Tim's help. And it will continue to facilitate negotiations between UK research groups and prospective international partners. So, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to assure the several members of the House who are all here today, who all share that interest in space research, that my honourable friend, the member for Bracknell, really has done an excellent job in bringing this crucial subject to the House's attention, and I will undertake, with my ministerial responsibilities, to follow very closely the debate on microgravity research as we prepare for the ESA ministerial next year.
Order. The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many as are of that opinion say aye. For the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.